Hanford Nuclear Plant was established in 1943 as a part of the Manhattan Project. The plant is located on a bend along the Columbia River of the Columbia Plateau in central Washington. Hanford is a nuclear production complex, home to the B reactor, the first full-scale plutonium production reactor in the world. It was used for manufacturing plutonium, and it has produced nearly two-thirds of the nation's plutonium stockpile. It even made the plutonium used in the first nuclear bomb, Fat Man, tested at the Trinity site in 1945. It even provided the plutonium for the nuclear bomb dropped on Nagasaki, Japan. Hanford is a dangerous place that has been negatively impacting the environment for decades now and still is today. For starters, the construction for Hanford began on March 22, 1943, which forced the relocation of two communities, the town of Hanford and the White Bluffs, and more than 1,500 people, all of which included farmers, ranchers, and the local Wanapum Indians, whose fishing sites and camps lined the Hanford Reservation and the shoreline of the Columbia River. Work included the simultaneous construction of 3 reactor complexes, 2 chemical separation complexes, a center for fuel manufacturing and research, a construction camp, and the employee village. The site was chosen by the Army because it was the perfect location for its secret bomb laboratory. This is because it's located in an isolated area for privacy, and being that it's along the Columbia River, it provided an abundant supply of clear, cold water, which the reactor requires to dissipate the heat from nuclear fusion. On top of that, it's close to 2 major dams, the Grand Coulee Dam and Bonneville Dam, which produce the hydroelectricity powering the plant. Today, the site encompasses a total of 586 square miles, and now the plutonium complex has grown to a total of 9 reactors, all of which are closed now. Hanford is the only operating nuclear plant in the Northwest. Construction on the plant began in the 1970s, as well as on 2 other plants at Hanford as part of the hydrothermal power program, but the other 2 were never completed. The Battelle Research Laboratories have research facilities that were the primary focus of work, being the Federal Department of Energy's effort to clean up the radioactive waste left over from the Manhattan Project. It did not stop the plutonium production until the end of the Cold War in 1989. Most of the waste is liquid, approximately 53 million gallons to be exact. The liquid was from the chemical extraction process of soaking uranium fuel rods from the reactors in nitric acid to separate plutonium, and stored in 177 underground tanks, 70 of which are leaking. An underground plume of radioactivity is seeping toward the Columbia River, and it is unknown when it will reach the river. But radioactivity has been detected in the water in the vicinity of Hanford and downriver. There are also 1,700 waste sites and approximately 500 contaminated buildings. There is plenty of solid waste, which includes 75,000 barrels of solid radioactive waste, most of which is still buried in trenches, spent fuel rods, and 2,300 tons of spent fuel stored in underwater tanks at the 2K basin reactors. This toxic waste has left monumental effects on our very own Washington environment, the people around it, and is also affected globally, and is a major hazard to our health. In Hanford's 45-year history as a nuclear weapons factory, some 450 billion gallons of waste and wastewater have been discharged into the soil, which is leaking and has leaked into the central Washington's groundwater. This leads to radioactive groundwater leaking into the Columbia River. Washington is said to be the second largest wine producer in the U.S., and internationally it's the third largest food exporter and agricultural products, such as fresh fruits, vegetables, dairy products, and seafood. New accidents and leaks have raised the specter of crop or livestock contamination, and they pose a risk of threatening Washington's $51 billion agricultural industry. According to Washington State Department of Energy, the radioisotopes tritium and strontium-90 are reaching the Columbia River, Strontium-90 is known as the bone seeker due to its propensity to deposit in bone marrow once ingested in sufficient quantities, increasing the risk of cancer. Despite the pump and treatment centers along the river's edge removing 100,000 pounds of contaminants from groundwater annually, there are still radioactive substances like strontium-90 entering the river. In fact, it's entering the river in some places at 1,000 times the drinking water standard. There have been traces of tritium found in wine samples collected around Hanford in 2013 that could have been from Hanford. Although tritium is the least threatening of radioactive isotope consumption, can lead to a heightened risk for cancer. Although at the time Hanford's threat to humans and agricultural is minimum due to the diluting powers of the Columbia River, the threat only continues to grow. Toxicity of the waters at Hanford has also affected many of its workers. There is a long list of workers permanently affected by Hanford employees have been hospitalized, sick, suffering, and dying from exposures with ailments such as permanent brain damage, dementia, vision loss, debilitating nerve damage, permanent lung damage, lung disease, and cancer, and many have even died due to chronic exposure to toxins at the site, and the list continues to grow. Incidents are still occurring today, and there have been 3 of them this year. 50 workers were exposed to toxic vapors from the end of April all the way to May 30th. On May 9th, there was a collapse of a tunnel used to store radioactive materials and equipment, and the workers were evacuated. Today, June 8th, 2 air monitor alarms went off in a demolition area of Hanford's plutonium finishing plant, causing workers to take cover because it detected contamination in the area. As for Hanford's global effects, it doesn't only contain its own toxic waste, it receives waste from across the country and has left waste in more places than just the Hanford Reservation. The Puget Sound Naval Shipyard, where the U.S. Navy removes the reactor compartments from submarines, sends the reactor compartments from all of its nuclear submarines to Hanford. The reactors are sent to a trench at Hanford through the Columbia River. 77 different subs have stored their reactors at Hanford. Oregon's only nuclear power plant has shut down after a cracked seam tube released radioactive gas into the plant in 1992. And in 2001, the reactor was shipped to Hanford, where it was buried in a 45-foot deep pit and covered with 6 inches of gravel. 3,400 cubic yards of contaminated soil, debris, and cubic equipment are transported from the Albany site in Oregon to Hanford for disposal. When recycled uranium was sent from Hanford to Paducah, Kentucky for enrichment, Titanium-99, a byproduct of enriching recycled uranium, has contaminated 250 million gallons of groundwater underneath the Paducah site. Operation Wigwam, a deep-water destination, was conducted in the Pacific Ocean, approximately 500 miles southwest of San Diego, California. The 33-kiloton blast dispersed over 330 billion cubic feet of radioactive seawater. As you can see, Hanford is a major hazard that needs to be cleaned up, and because the toxicity levels are so high and there are such mass amounts of radioactive waste, it's going to take years and years to clean up, as well as billions of dollars. The sooner we clean up this mess, the less of a threat there will be to our health and future generations. We need to be proactive rather than reactive to prevent any more lives from being harmed.